can do when we stand united. We are one with the world. We can make a brighter tomorrow. Together make a change. It's our life. We can't step back from what we know is right. So let's shine our light. Oh, let's shine our light. We won't listen to what they're saying. We know it's just love that we're giving to this place that we call our home. We can't change what's been done, but it's still our run. We are one with the world. We can make a brighter tomorrow. Together make a change. It's our life. We can't step back from what we know is right. So let's shine our light.
Catalyzing Change Week 2024 is building the social innovation sector from the 6th to the 10th of May. Players of the social innovation sector, from knowledgeable academics paving new paths to government champions igniting policy shifts, have curated over 100 action-oriented sessions hosted from more than 30 countries in a mix of up to 6 languages. The outcomes of these sessions is intended to drive the development of a highly impactful sector. The goal of CCW 2024 is to tackle the challenges of the sector and embrace solutions that will bridge the gaps in policy, behaviors, and mindsets through innovation and collaborative action. Let's create lasting change together. Register for CCW now and check out our events calendar at catalyzingchangeweek.catalyst2030.net.
Hi everyone, welcome to our CCW session. If you could include in the chat your name, your organization, and where you in the world you are calling from, we would appreciate it. And now I'm going to pass the words to Glynis, who is going to be leading the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the globe today. And thank you for joining and welcome. I'm Glynis Rankin, Chief Executive Officer of Creator Métier and co-chair of the Shifting the Funding Paradigm Working Group at Catalyst 2030. I'm joined by Nadia Kist, Director of Africa Partnerships with Bloodwater, who's also a member of the SFP Working Group, as well as Catalyst's Africa Forward initiative. We have the honour of being with you as your co-facilitators for today's workshop, Shifting Funding Practices from the Ground Up, Grassroot Action and Accountability. Nadia, over to you.
Thank you, Glynis. If you are joining us today, we believe not only that you care about seeing the equity movement translate into practice, but we also believe that you are willing to be a part of it. Our convening is intended to be far more than a conversation ending within the boundaries of this 1-hour Zoom call. We are inviting you into a very powerful and necessary call to action that's championed today by the great leaders who will be speaking with us in today's session. This workshop will also be framed into 2 parts. So first, we will hear from the 3 leaders of community-rooted organizations who are holding funders accountable to the sector's growing commitment to funding equity. Following a panel discussion, Glynis will walk us into a workshop where you, every participant in the Zoom room, will have an opportunity to bring your own experiences and collective action strategies into the discussion to inform the Catalyst community in the immediate future and even for years to come. So may today's conversation challenge mindsets of scarcity of resources, reframe being told no from a position of powerless to powerful, and also activate our collective agency to define the sector's understanding of local to inform true global change. Today is about shifting the funding paradigm as demanded by local organizations in the most authentic definition of the term. We are grateful for our speakers' courage, their generosity, and their leadership. So on that note, let's get started. Please join me in welcoming Terry Kinua, the country manager of Invest in Africa, or IIA Kenya, a network which convenes diverse stakeholders around a common mission of empowering micro, small, and medium enterprises to create sustainable jobs through enhancing their access to markets, skills, and finance. Also welcome with me, John Amimo, the head of programs at the African Rural and Agricultural Credit Association, or AFRACA, a regional association of sub-Saharan financial and non-financial institutions whose goal is to build strong learning opportunities and sustainable financial empowerment for its members. And lastly, Jimmy Katuma, Executive Director for Community Partnerships for Relief and Development, or COPRED, based in Malawi, a community-based NGO whose holistic development model exists to build empowered communities that are able to identify, plan, and solve their own problems. Jimmy's work is centered around the intersection of gender inequality with education and the lack of access to adequate WASH in his context. So we're going to get started with Terry. Terry, thank you for being with us today. In your work with IIA, you are championing micro, small, and medium enterprises to be acknowledged and resourced as the powerful contributors towards the SDGs that they truly are. To be most impactful missionally, you have developed a clear set of criteria that you use to consider if a funding partnership is right for your organization as well as for your members. Can you tell us a little bit about how you arrived at this? What were the experiences that helped shape where you stand in deciding who's the right fit for your organization?
Thank you very much, Nadia, and good afternoon, everyone from Nairobi, Kenya. And I would like to say good evening, good morning to everybody else. As you've heard, I'm Terry Kinua, really grateful for this opportunity to be sharing with you and exploring together regarding today's title. And thanks, Nadia, for your questions. So firstly, what I would like to say, indeed, we do have a criteria that helps us to choose funding that is beneficial and helpful to invest in Africa. And some of the critical criteria, I'll just really summarize this, although we break down quite a bit more when we look at each point, is firstly that the funding has to be mission aligned. So our mission is to empower micro, small, and medium enterprises to create sustainable jobs. And therefore, all the funding has to be moving towards advancing this mission. And when I say this, being an intermediary or an implementation partner for many funders, it's really looking at, does this carry your mission forward, or does it cause a mission drift, which ultimately will hurt the organization? And secondly, the funding must address that immediate specific need that we have in maybe the communities that you would like to implement or the groups, for example. So rather than going for non-local, irrelevant programs and interventions that no doubt may have worked somewhere else, the point is one size does not fit all when we are doing the work we're doing. So we wouldn't want to say that this worked very well in another country, maybe in another continent, and therefore we expect it to work well. Instead, we are going towards a funding opportunity that allows us to co-create, that allows us to ensure that there's localization and that it does directly address the immediate and specific needs that we see. That, of course, as I said, now linked to the first point, ensuring that there's no mission drift. It's very critical for us as a third point to ensure that there is mutual value of partners in a relationship. And I say this because, all my colleagues will agree with me, not every funding partnership gives equal value to the partners. But we like to view funding relationship as equally valuable from a tripartite perspective, that is both for the funding partner as well as the implementing partner, and finally for the communities that you're going to implement. And the last one is that it has to make sense for the organization. What does it require of us? If it's requiring us to give months of very expensive input without clear direction and clarity where this is going, that may not be the funding for us. Secondly, if it's requiring us to spend $3 to $5 to report on $1 of spending, again, that may not be valuable for us. But how did we arrive at this? We've had experience with both good and quote unquote bad funding, and we see how each of these impacts the organization. Some of the experiences, firstly, we desire to replicate, and some of the experiences we must avoid to ensure that we are sustainable. So this criteria helps us to pursue that path that enables us to achieve this, to replicate the experiences that have been valuable to the organization and to avoid the ones that have not been valuable. Thank you very much. I'm giving a very brief answer, but of course, I look forward to engaging a lot more as we continue the discussions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Terry. Thank you very much. It's amazing to hear with such clarity the level of evaluation that is now required, whereas there is a mindset that previously existed that funding partners are coming to the table and a partner should be willing to accept it no matter what the alignment or terms or conditions or anything of that nature. Taking this kind of a stance certainly requires immense fortitude, immense courage. It also requires a complete change in perspective from that mindset of scarcity and a need to do work and a need to have the resources versus taking the risk to say no or to pass up an opportunity. If we exist in that kind of an ecosystem that feels often very scarce, it could feel for many organizations, perhaps even some in the room, like this is a really impossible stand to take. Can you speak to this a little bit? Can you just share from your experience, like the actual experiences that you had to walk through to say no? What were the risks, but then also what are the payoffs?
Thanks a lot, Nadia, and great that you speak of the mindset, because what we are trying to do in making a shift does take immense courage, but at the same time, you want to ensure that there's actual goodwill embedded in this funding relationship for it to actually have the impact and the transformation that we desire. There must be that goodwill, and therefore, of course, it does take courage. There have been risks. Actions have consequences. Some of these consequences are not always favorable for us, but we must remember that the stand we are taking, the criteria we have in place, is really aimed at protecting the sustainability of the organization, ensuring that we can continue to deliver a mission that many of our network members, actually rely on. So some of the key risks has been, for example, as Invest in Africa, we have turned down funding when we have had inadequate funding, sometimes when we have had no funding, and sometimes the next cycle of funding will take long to come around. And of course, you're tempted to think about the funding that you forfeited, but you must always, be courageous and get to a point of thinking, okay, perhaps I'm dying, but am I dying doing the right thing? Am I doing right by the network members? Am I doing right by all the people who have placed their trust on our mission, that we are working together towards this mission? Let's touch a bit on some opportunities. The biggest opportunity is, when you have that one misaligned partner, remember, it can actually kill you. But having the right aligned partner can open for you doors, all the right doors to get you to actually replicate that kind of funding. Because once you're aligned and they understand what you're trying to do and do an agreement, then they will introduce you to other similar funding that will help the organization and the network to move forward. And secondly is that impact-driven focus, for example, for Invest in Africa, it has opened for us doors. It has enabled us to enter rooms that we actually would not have had an opportunity to enter. And this is a real opportunity that really comes by ensuring we make those aligned changes. So that abundance, that mindset of abundance, of not thinking, what am I losing, but thinking, what am I opening myself up to, can give you the courage. So the risks are there. Of course, there's always that question. Sometimes you question yourself, but I always like to think, not what am I losing by letting this go, but what am I losing by hanging on to this if it's not the right funding for the organization. Thank you.
That is so powerful, to consider what could be the ultimate risks to the organization if there is such a strong drift away from mission. That actually takes us to our next speaker, John. This idea of what begins with a no can actually become a different kind of a yes. And more so a yes that is rooted in a value alignment, yes that is rooted in mutuality, and also a yes that from the perspective of an organization like yours, demanding to be seen for the full value that you hold. John, Afraka has recently experienced this. Can you tell us a little bit more about how being clear about who you are and the value that your organization is bringing into a partnership is actually asserting autonomy and just the role that this plays in furthering your mission?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Nadia, for giving me this opportunity. And thank you to the organizers of Catalyst 2030 for giving me this platform to share my thoughts. In a session and a question that has been directed to me, which I can really, relate with. Let me just reintroduce myself. My name is John Amimo. I doubled up as a network and a programs coordinator at Afraka, which is a Pan-African organization based in Nairobi. We have existed for over 70 years to promote access to affordable and sustainable financial resources to rural and agricultural communities in Africa. We represent approximately 110 member institutions, most of whom are financial institutions. So you're talking about central banks, microfinance institutions, commercial banks, rural banks, fintechs, agritechs, quite diverse. So to most funders, diversity is what we bring to the table. That is our value proposition to funders. If you need a representative face of the financial sector in sub-Saharan Africa, Afraka is a go-to place. So for quite some time, I have to be honest, because we are probably the oldest network here. We enjoyed consistent funding from some of our traditional funders. But then at some point, that funding started to dry up. And it was at this point that we realized, okay, maybe we have to reflect. We need to reflect on our funding relationships. And we came up with similar criteria, like, what Terry has just said about Invest in Africa, what they did. And yeah, so it was more like a period to reflect on our, let me say, on our values, mostly. I think that was the biggest realization during that point. And we realized that a lot of the value that we offer always goes unnoticed. We represent quite a diverse network. Coordinating and managing that, managing members in such a network is not easy. And we realize that in a lot of the funding relationships or opportunities that we have received over the years, this has not been reflected. So we had to start, rethinking and also changing our own paradigm and say, you know what, we have to make sure that we work with funders who, priority number one, who value our existence in this space. So yeah, so I think how maybe just to respond to your question, and I think it was at this time when we were reflecting, like I said, it was also a turning point for us. That was the time one of the funders reached out again, and told us, John, we want to work with you again, and but we have a budget, and this is what we have. Can you work with us? And we boldly say no. Of course, it was a gamble. It was a risk we were willing to take. And, I could tell this somehow caught the funder off guard. And we were even thinking like, well, yeah, it looks like we've lost the opportunity. But yeah, but the funder came back, tried to renegotiate with us. They asked us, okay, fine. We realize some of the work that you do is important. So how do you want to be compensated? How do you want the budget to look like? So we had to redo the budget, which they looked at again and they said, well, this is beyond the limit that we have, so we have to go to tender. And I think you know what that means. Tender, when you go to tender, it's always a 50-50 chance. And we're like, yeah, that's fine. It's a gamble we're willing to take. And we went to tender. And fortunately enough, we did win the tender. And I think that was quite a strong message to us, I think maybe we've been undervaluing ourselves all these years and we have something good to offer. But yeah, so we went to tender, we won, we did the project. And after the project, there was phase two. And again, we did, re-emphasize our stand. And they said, okay, you want us to do phase two, you need to consider this budget again. Now, phase two didn't happen as we had planned, but something happened, which I think was probably a positive thing, because fine, phase two did not happen, but what happened next is what actually surprised us, because the funder reached out to us and said, okay, we want to also relook at how we work with you, and we would like you to join our strategic planning process. So that is something that has never happened, and we felt, well, fine. I mean, this is a good opportunity, for us to articulate what we want our funders to align and how they should align with a fracker. So yeah, it was a positive. It wasn't a financial positive, factor, but I think I would say that from that process and from that experience, somehow we did manage to change something, from the funder. Yeah, so I think that was what I wanted to share, Nadia.
Yeah, I just want to pause and yeah to that.
Nadia, I think you're losing power.
And I'm sure everyone in the room had with this funder.
You're okay. Go ahead.
Okay. So maybe just to then continue on with the conversation. There's something very powerful that came out from your experience, which is a template for all of us in the room who are listening and in these same situations, that knowing who you are and understanding the undeniable value that your organization is bringing raises a whole other area of accountability that we need to acknowledge. And when we were preparing for this conversation, John, we talked about it, just rightfully attributing expertise to Indigenous solutions, ideas, and partners. And part of this shifting the power differentials also requires that we speak about localization. In your view, what is the relationship between accountability and localizing access to resources? And where do you see the state of things, John, from the work that you're doing?
Yeah, good question, Nadia. I think in my space, what is really exciting right now in the agri-fin space is the agri-tech and the fintech revolution. I like what they're doing. We represent your suit and tie financial provider. So the agri-techs have come in and somehow changed the paradigm in funding, which personally I like. But what really worries me, I think, are the so-called challenge funds, innovation funds, catalytic funds, name it. There's so many, and these are all opportunities, to resource, some of the local ideas on the ground. But unfortunately, what I see is the winners uh, always do not reflect the reality of the local ideas. I think that is what worries me in this, and I would like to see, more equity. I would like to see more indigenous agri-tech and fintech companies getting access to some of these resources. And I think as leaders, I know I look like I'm complaining, but I think I said, you know what? Maybe I'll stop complaining and do something about this. So in my own personal way, and together with my other network colleagues, we started something that we call, the Kenya Agri-Tech County Fair. Now, when we talk about this fair, everyone keeps asking us one question: who is funding it? You know, and I always tell them no one is funding it. This is an idea that is being driven by passionate network leaders like myself, and we want to see this through. And when we did the concept and all that, and we actually shared it with the government, and I was happy to see them that, this has to work. That's what they told us. This has to work, continue with the same spirit. They've given us all the support. And, somehow, we are, seeing something happening, some change. We can't effect change if we just sit and complain, really. So this is what we're trying to do. Yeah, so Nadia, I hope I've answered your question.
Yeah, you did. And also you introduced something that's really important that we need to reframe our mindsets as an entire sector, which is that bold, transformative ideas are not dependent on funding. And there is something powerful and catalytic that exists outside of whether or not a partner is engaged or it can even be part of a conversation to deem something fundable. So I just really want to commend that. And thank you for sharing that experience. This is a perfect segue to our third and final speaker on this panel portion of the session. Jimmy, we would be remiss to have a conversation about power and accountability if we're not actually even giving space to look at the reality of how hard systems changes, and that there are still mechanisms by which some structures bypass systems by changing or misrepresenting localization. Jimmy, if you can share with us not just what you went through or what COPRED experienced, what are the consequences that you are seeing as a result when partnerships are not truly engaging local experts and organizations to be the owners of their processes?
Thank you, Nadia, and thank you everyone for sparing time to be part of this discussion. Thank you, John. Thank you, Ter, for giving us very insightful presentation that I have really enjoyed and opened my eyes more wider. Yeah, coming to the question that Nadia has posed to me, firstly, I should say about the experience that COPRED went through with regard to partnerships. Partnerships are supposed to be a kind of relationship that should be based on trust. And mostly it is like the so-called bigger or international organizations that questions the integrity of the so-called local or small organizations. I'm bringing this issue because it was some years back, we were approached by a partner, and then this partner wanted to make a joint bid in an HIV prevention care and support program that was floated by USAID. And then the total bid amount was $6 million. So when they looked around in Malawi, they found us. They found the Community Partnership for Relief and Development as COPRED to be an implementing lead partner in this project. Now, our role was to provide data and then put together with them a bid, a winning bid for that matter. We did our part, and then after submitting the documents, we have signed the pre-teaming and teaming agreements and all other. The due diligence have been done. Then suddenly we received an email to say, now we are trimming the budget allocations. And our allocation from the 6 million was 1.1 million for 3 years. Now, this time it was reduced to 300,000 for 3 years. So it's because we asked why. Then instead of receiving a response as to why the budget has been cut or reduced, then we got an email to say, we lack the capacity, so they can no longer work with us. Then we're surprised. When did they realize that we lack the capacity? So we tried to get a response from where the email came from. Of course, the email came from the US, with their head office. When we tried to follow through, and then we got no response. And then we tried to contact their local representative. We got no response. And then this partner suddenly became invisible. Then we were surprised because we never imagined that the so-called international big organization can be deceitful. So it was a shock for us that we were used and just dumped like that. So that's the experience that we went through with this kind of partnerships. Yes, maybe I should stop from that on the experience. Now, on the other part, you had asked me a question on how the partners should be viewed at local level or treated. In this one, what I can say is that as corporate, we are also labeled as a local organization. Of course, we applaud ourselves also to say we are a local organization. But to our understanding, being local does not only go beyond registration.
Right.
Because most these international organizations, they are registered, for example, in the UK. They said we are so international organization. Now, because the Malawian laws says that a local organization should have this apart from should be registered in Malawi, having this kind of board members, number of percentage of board members, Malawians, and this and that. So when they comply to that, then they say they are local. But localization should not only be confined in registration. It should be defined, for example, like how much money. Is it 100% of the total amount of money that they get is spent within the country? That is local. Because you cannot say you have 100,000, then you spend 50,000 in Malawi, then you say you are local. That's not the definition. 100% of the resources earmarked for Malawi should go to Malawi, 100%. For example, the bid that I was talking about. USAID allocated this money, 6 million, to go to Malawi as Malawian development aid. And then if it was Malawian development, it was supposed to be spent in Malawi. And again, in protecting this local organization, for example, it would have been much better for the funding institutions, bilateral funding institutions or multilateral ones, to put a deliberate policies that protects local organizations. To say when you have identified a partner and then you have signed pre-teaming agreements with them, and then that's it. If there is any issue that needs to be sorted, or somebody needs to get some kind of recourse, then they should have a clause somewhere where say you can reach out to this place or this place through this email or through this contact. That way, this deceit that we have went through wouldn't have happened. because there we would have been protected. So this is the experience that we went through, and I'm happy to share it with you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jimmy. You've introduced some very powerful perspectives that is often not part of the conversation, starting with trust, which is often the lens of, are you trustworthy to receive, rather than, are you, the funding partner, trustworthy to hold the agreement that which was set up and that we helped you to access the funding for. There's a very, very powerful call to action here for all of us in this room, for all of us in the ecosystem, but most specifically for communities. And just a closing question for everyone on the panel, please. I would love to welcome the three of you to give your perspective just on Jimmy's last comment about localization is more than registration. Who should be defining what local means? And what is part of that consideration?
I'm happy to share some thoughts, Nadia.
Please.
Thank you. And, Jimmy talks about a very important point in as far as, how much is spent locally. When I talk about a look and feel, because we have seen, and I'm sure my colleagues will agree, funding going to a local organization. But when you get on the ground, everybody that is handling this project is a foreigner. And when I mean a foreigner, I see a comment by Jacob there who says, someone was born in a country, now feels local. No, really, you're talking about people with the experience of the communities that we are saying we are going to implement this. Not someone that has just been landed there, because again, this one size fits all mentality will be there. But there's a point that I want to touch. Localization cannot be agreed outside of the country. For example, we cannot have someone landing to Kenya and saying, hi, Kenyan people, this is what localization means. That is not localization. It must involve the actual organizations within the country to arrive at this. And before I depart, I just want to give more room for discussion by others. I want to make a point on what Jimmy has said about being used, because that is really a theme that is very common if we take a quick poll in any of this kind of conversation. And it is not just by that person that has sought funding and then comes back to you. We've had actual funders also involving us for many months, a year and a half. We give them as much data and they'll say, go back, bring more. And it's very expensive input. They ghost you just for them to reappear after a year to introduce the local office that they have opened. You can't help to not feel used. And what more needs to be done to protect organizations from this? Because trust is two-way, as you said, Nadia. It's not, am I trustworthy to receive your funding? It's really all around for all the parties involved in the partnership relationship.
Yeah, thank you, Terry. John, any thoughts about this? When accountability is not there, what losses are we experiencing?
Yeah, I think my colleagues have really, touched on the topic. I work for a regional organization, so maybe it doesn't hit me so much. But yeah, I think I like your call for action. And that call for action, what does that mean? Maybe we need to start having, advocacy workshops, conferences to shout a bit more. But that is just my take on the next step. But in terms of losses, Nadia, I wish I was able to quantify losses in monetary terms. I wish, but I can't. But maybe I'll respond through an example. And I think my colleagues had shared some of these examples through their presentation. But it's the same thing, like an example is we had a funder last year who came to discuss the funding and collaborating, opportunity with us. We spent quite some time, I think probably 2 months, combined, just going back and forth, co-creating the program together. And then, when you do this as a network, we do anticipate that, okay, fine, this project is coming, this funding is coming. So we factor that in our work plan, right? And this work plan is shared with our members. And, our members will always give us feedback, oh, so you're going to do this next year. I'll make sure I attend, or I'll make sure I do this, I'll make sure I'll be there. Yeah, so come at the beginning of the year, the funder ghosted us, no response, went quiet. So there you go. Well, what are the implications of this? You have a work plan that reflects some activities that are to be done with someone else. You have members you have to answer to, because our members, financial institutions, they prepare way early for programs. So again, you have to start, trying to defend the organization that, well, this is not going to happen as we planned, blah, blah, blah. That has an impact for us, is because we also depend on subscription payment from our members. And when members see that you are not keeping to your promises, they sometimes they rebel. They stop paying subscription because they feel, I'm not going to benefit from anything from Africa. So why should I pay subscription? That loss it really hits us hard. And that is just one aspect of it. So that's what I'm saying. I wish I could quantify, our subscription payments, of course, is in money. I wish I can tell you how many members are withholding their subscription because we are not keeping the promises that we had shared in our work plan. Yeah, it can have quite a big impact in organizations. So I think there's a lot to be done in terms of making sure there's that trust and accountability. If there's no trust between our funders, that also trickles down to our members, and we lose their trust as well. I cannot reiterate more how that will impact the organization.
Yeah, thank you. This issue of the ripple effect of others' lack of integrity damages your credibility. Jimmy, any final thoughts on this before we shift gears into the workshop portion of the session?
Yes, thank you, John. Thank you, Terry, for these contributions on this. The point that we are talking now is about a call to action. And then we can only have a call to action if we are supported, because this call for action has to have an element of protection from the stronger party to protecting the weaker party. There is this term, confidentiality agreements or non-disclosure agreements. These non-disclosure agreements are said you have to sign the non-disclosure agreements, meaning that even if you are mistreated in any way, then you have to be bound by these non-disclosure agreements. Because where there is any issues that are driven by value, driven by mutual trust and understanding, there's no need to have these non-disclosure agreements. But then we sign all these non-disclosure agreements, including even our board members also sign that, non-disclosure agreements. But when they decided, this partner decided now to say that you lack a capacity, they did not even talk to the board members to say, even though you signed, they just went. But it wasn't their money. This was the money from the American people. And the American people were not even aware that somebody is playing with other people's minds using their money. So the call to action has to have a strong element. Whenever any institution is floating this call for application, they have to put inside there a clause that protects the weaker, that protects the local and then define even the definition of lack of capacity. It bothers me because when they were able to identify us, and when they were able to ask us to put together all this data and then present a winning bid, because then there was capacity. Then they would have identified lack of capacity at a due diligence level. Now, we have done everything. The bid is awarded. And because of the lack of funding, as John has said, they identified those other partners that were not even part of the process to implement the project together with them. How they identified them, we don't even know. But because I'm sure that because these people accepted whatever money, 50,000, 100,000, whatever, because funding is hard to come by. So we need to be protected. I think that should be a call for action on my part. Thank you.
Thank you. What a powerful place to end. Apologies to everyone in the room. My Zoom is getting darker because I have no power and I'm working off of a hotspot. Thank you, all three of your incredibly powerful voices and your courage to share this experience. Glynis, over to you.
Well, thank you. And Terry, John, Jimmy, you know, you've brought up so many critical issues here, issues that in a way, you know, you're almost expected to take for granted in the way, you know, these experiences are horrendous for your entities. And yet somehow, as you say, you're not able to talk about them because you're constrained by NDAs. And John, when you spoke about reputation, you know, there's a risk to your reputation with your members. There's a financial cost of that time and what we phrased as invisible work, all that work you did to try and win that bid, in faith, in good faith and in trust. And then there's a loss of the actual funding, the work itself. And all of those things impact your viability and where you're spending your time and energy, because that time and energy is spent round and round in these circles that you have so strongly stood up against. So I think those of you who are on this call, we're working towards transformative systemic impact. And this has really shown the importance of that work. And we'd like to give you the opportunity to participate. We could easily listen. I think Jimmy has dropped off, maybe had a connection issue, but we could listen to you, John, Terry and Jimmy, for the whole afternoon, the whole evening. We could be here for hours discussing these issues. We need to take them very seriously. But what I'd like to do is invite you who have been listening alongside with me to share some of your experiences. I know there's quite a lot of conversation in the chat, and we'll track that and pull that out as part of the sort of follow-up to this event. But perhaps I could invite you to think about this from 2 points of view. We have just a short time left, but first of all, if you would like to share something that you're doing differently, a way in which you've stood up in the way John and Terry you described, you're doing something differently, taking power and engaging differently with funders. And then I'd also like to hear about what you think needs to change. So following on from this conversation, what actions do you think need to be taken to bring this conversation to the world and really address these issues? So over to you. Please raise your hand if you'd like to speak. And Inez, Gannon, please just point to people if I miss them. So we have Jackie. Can we come to you?
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you for the very insightful talks. I want to talk about a personal experience here in Lebanon. I'm sure you all heard about the Beirut port explosion, the unfortunate thing that happened and did a disaster to the whole country. When that happened, actually, we all discovered the lack of connection between international organization being funded with big money and the local soldiers, let me say, on the ground, that we were with very little resources battling to see the needs of people whereas we spoke the language, we knew the need, we were familiar to the people. And I had a personal discussion with many international organizations, leaders who came specifically to Lebanon, and they told me, we feel not able to do even half of what you are doing with your little resources. So my comment here or question would be, how can we shift the mindset of those international big, huge donors / organizations with big money and make them understand that, yes, they have the know-how, but they cannot implement it in any place unless they have local small organization being at the forefront, because we know our people, we know our culture, they have the means. So we really need to strengthen this relationship. And it showed big time when we had this huge disaster, how the resources were there and the link was lacking. So we started to do something in that regard, but I think it is still there. I hear it happening in Ukraine. I hear it happening in Palestine.
Yeah.
I see it happen in so many places. How can we work around that? Because I think it's a major, major obstacle to the local organizations in order for us to get funds. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. John, Terry, would you like to respond to this? Would either of you like to come in? Terry, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Dr. Jackie. And I think some of the sentiments that we shared earlier were exactly that. Yes, you have your expertise, you have your experience, but when it comes to the ground, there's a lot of differences. We cannot bring that, intervention or program as is, make it work here and expect the results that you have gotten somewhere else. What happens is that there's no impact, there's no transformation, because it's not tailored to how it can be received or how it can have impact here. But, like Dr. Jackie has said, it's not one versus the other. It is one plus the other. We combine and we collaborate to ensure that then what you bring on board, both the funding and your expertise and best practice, that we come and incorporate it together with the culture, the people, the profile. Even locally, one size does not fit all. A profile changes from another. And I would like us to move, as Dr. Jackie has said, to a point of less competition, more collaboration, and then we shall see the impact and the transformation that, ironically, everybody is looking for, both the large companies as well as the local companies and the communities on the ground. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Jackie, thank you. And really well said. And, we're hearing all the way through this conversation that lack of mutuality, lack of mutual respect, lack of recognition of the value that you each bring and your organizations and networks bring. And then, that's undervalued. And John, we talked about this invisible work, all that work you do, that if you can make it visible, adds value, and then you may be in a very different relationship in some of those conversations. But this is a big systemic question, a huge systemic question. Who else would like to come in with a question or a comment, an experience from your context as we come towards the end of our session? Love to hear some more experiences here. Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands raised. Inez, am I missing anything here?
I raised my hand, Glynis.
Okay, please go ahead. Sorry.
Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you for the session. This is by far the best session I've been in a long time. And I saw, because I'm on the committee, I saw some of the work, and still it's blowing my mind. Thank you so much. What I wanted to come back to was, first of all, to recognize the panel, and especially actually maybe Jimmy, who's not on anymore. That's unfortunate, but the courage it takes to tell these stories and how many of these stories I would imagine everyone on the call hears in going about their work. And also to share that I think bringing forums together like this and making it more normal to talk about these things could be really important and powerful. As a little side information, in preparing for this session, I actually was aware of a group that had a really challenging experience with a donor, and I approached them, and because I was inspired by how they had responded in a moment where, let's say, power became very clear very quickly. But they opted not to participate in the session because they were worried about the implications of that in a funding world where sometimes the consequences of these things, there can be real consequences if you start talking publicly about things. And so I would really like to recognize the panel for speaking out and just challenge us, and we can do this at Shifting the Funding Paradigm as a working group, to think about how we can keep bringing these conversations together.
Gannon, thank you. And I think you raise a really important point about the fear that there exists about speaking out. And I think, you know, we've demonstrated and heard on this call today that actually if you stand up and say appropriately and talk about your experience or push back, that can often open a very different type of conversation. And just to confirm what you were saying, Gannon, as part of our work overall and working with the Shifting the Funding Paradigm work group, I talked to CEOs of large global networks, and trust me, they were saying exactly the same thing. No, I don't think I could do that, because how would funders view us if I was public on this? So A, the same experiences, and B, not being willing to speak. And so I think that speaking should not be something we're afraid of. This should be a constructive conversation, and many funders actually want to work differently. So there's really something to explore here. And I would encourage you to just look at the Shifting the Funding Paradigm page on the Catalyst 2030 website. Nez, thanks, you put it in the chat, and see if this is something you'd like to get involved in, because actually we need all of these conversations to happen. It's no good a load of northern actors, albeit very well intentioned, talking to each other. We actually need to hear the real issues and the real challenges, and to really be able to move forward differently. And today this session has really, I think, opened up that you know the real issues we need to think about. So I'd just like to really thank you for contributing and for being with us today. As I say, there's a huge amount going on in the chat here, so let's capture that chat. We'll come back, I think, to follow this up. Nadia, John, Terry, and of course Jimmy, thank you so much for this, and thank you all for joining us. Please do feel free to engage and carry on this conversation, because it's such a critical one. And as you said, Terry, everybody wants this to work, and it's not working because we're all caught in this spider's web of the way systems work, and it needs to change, and it could change so easily if there's that momentum and that willingness. So thank you so much. And Inez, back to you.
Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you to the speakers. And if you'd like to know more about the Shifting the Funding Paradigm working group, please reach out to me. I'll be happy to have a quick conversation with you, and you'll be part of the group and have the possibility to collaborate in our initiatives and projects, and engage in CCW sessions like this one. And thank you, Glynis and Nadia, for your work, and to Jimmy, Terry, and John. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for everyone. Thank you so much.